Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another Supercoach Insider podcast. My name is Swiz, here to talk pre-season team discussion. I'm going to be talking structure, teams, training updates, plus answering your questions. But as always, check us out on all our social media platforms, in particular YouTube, Spotify, and get in contact with us via Twitter, supercoachinsider100 and Swiz26. Thank you to everybody that's tuned in to our early pre-season discussions. Myself, Ben, and Chris have all uploaded them now and had some great responses, some great questions from the community. And we have put up our first group discussion for 2024. Some good Supercoach content, probably even better banter, taking the absolute mickey out of Ben. So that was a lot of fun. So yeah, if you haven't already, check that out. So I'm going to go through what my latest team is and talk some structure around that as well. Then I'll get into the latest training updates. And as we're going on, I'll try to answer some of the questions that have been thrown up. Some of these questions will be answered as I'm going through it, and any ones I don't get to, we will leave to the end. All right, so the main thing at the moment is I've sort of been trying to narrow down how many players I'm sort of got on my watch list. So there's currently 779 players listed in Supercoach. Of them, over 200k is 518, and that includes guys like Reed and McKercher, who are just over that normal rookie price, who are pretty well going to be locked in our teams on their current preseason form. So I've narrowed it down to a list of 80 people players I've got on my watch list so far. So some of them it's because you guys have brought up, so I've added them in to keep you guys informed, because obviously you've seen something that you really like and you're watching, and there's others through other discussions I've been having with other content creators. So yeah, in between that and my own list, I've come up with 80 names, and realistically in my structure, I'm probably looking at somewhere between I'd say 14 and 20 of these players, depending on what the how many good rookies we have, and that really decides our final structure. So yeah, I'll be trying to narrow this down, and usually what happens is, unfortunately, players get injured. There was a couple more that went down over the last couple of days, so you end up like crossing them off the list. And by about those first couple of preseason games, I'm trying to get that list down, narrowed to about a 50 or a 60, and then leading into the season, my perfect world, if there's say 20 players I want to pick, I want to have 40 names there, and then it just kind of becomes a 50-50 in each position. Pretty similar to what I did with the NBL and the Big Bash. NBL's worked out way better for me so far. AFL over the last few years has. I know somebody just asked a question to me before about in regards to rankings and average ranking and stuff, and I think we worked out that I've got an average ranking of 547 over the last 3 seasons, so pretty happy with that. It's been pretty consistent. Probably over the last 7 years, I've only had the one really bad season. Let's just say it was my COVID year, but outside of that, I think it's 5 top 1,000 finishes over the last 7 years. So I'm pretty happy with the consistency there. And you don't always get it right. You obviously want to get your starting side as close to possible. Didn't do so well. It was my first year as an expert in the BBL. And some of those 50-50 calls, didn't go my way. But at the same time, the probably the ones that I didn't go out of those 50-50 calls actually really went off. So sometimes it can just be bias or a bit of personal preference, or in this case for that particular season, it was put off by a couple of games that are going to be weather affected, which didn't get affected, and that's the way it sort of goes. So that's kind of how I plan out my pre-season. And then the rookies are kind of a bit of a different. It's more once a rookie kind of pops off in training or does something that's exciting, I just add them to the list. So there's 261 in that rookie price. At the moment, I think I've got about 30 names there, can continue to add more, and then I just sort of narrow it down as the season, in that week leading up to the season, as announcements are made, because until that sort of week before, we don't know which players or which rookies are going to get the first go. Now, it's a little bit different this year because we do have round 0, so we at least have 8 teams that will be playing. And you nearly think with round 0, there might be a chance that the clubs might do a bit of an intra-club. So the way this usually works for the season is you'll have clubs do their intra-club. Some of them are already doing sort of match sims at the moment, but probably the weekend of sort of the 16th, 17th, they might do intra-clubs. Then we've got actual proper scheduled practice matches, not the official pre-season matches, but proper practice matches. So that'll start off with Wednesday the 21st of Feb. North Melbourne Collingwood are kicking off a game at Arden Street at 10 a.m. Thursday the 22nd, we've got Sydney GWS at Tramway, which is the little oval outside the SCG. Carlton Geelong at Icon. Brisbane Gold Coast up at that Brighton Homes Arena. Then on the Friday, Bulldogs Hawthorn 11 a.m. at the Whitten Oval. St Kilda Essendon down at Moorabbin at 2 p.m. Port Adelaide and Adelaide. A lot of these teams play local teams because naturally it's so they don't have to travel. They got West Coast Fremantle listed also as well on the Saturday the 24th. So 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. So that means Richmond hasn't been named, unless I've completely missed that. But and there's one other team that I've completely missed, and you guys are thinking that is probably Melbourne. So wouldn't be surprised if they've organised something as well. So you get those teams all locking something in, and then they obviously have then the proper AFL preseason, so at least we get one game of that. Now, back in the day, we used to get 2 to 3 preseason games, so this is why these clubs actually, now play the unofficial game. And some of those rules are a bit different. We'll see some clubs do 8 quarters, 6 quarters, 4 quarters, you name it. And usually it's probably the best 22, 23 start off with. And then they sort of fade in or out some of those stars players and bring in some of the rookie guys to give their opportunity. That weekend will be important for us. Then we obviously lead into the proper preseason match, and then this year it's round 0, so we get a look at those 8 teams, and then some of those decisions will be driven by that, because if players are popping off in that round 0, they might become must-haves, especially if they're going to get a big cash gen for us, or maybe it's the opposite, that some of our primos, they might get injuries or really held down, and then you're like, well, I might be able to pick these players up cheaper. So that all comes into it. One of the first questions I had, which is pretty obvious because he's highly owned. I've got the percentages there. So 60% Nick Daicos is why I didn't have Nick Daicos in my early side, and I actually still don't. It is something that is going to probably divide the community. I know a lot of people want to have him, and I'm going to want to have him at some point anyway. It's not the point that I don't think Nick Daicos is going to be a great player this year, because he's going to be a superstar. And I think this came from, the guy's called Other Side. His Twitter handle was that anyway. So I just am worried about, now it's a very short career he's had, but his worst performing team has been Sydney Swans so far, and that is who he's playing off in round 1. Now that is the premiership unveiling, and also the fact that it will be at the MCG, big match for the Pies. But just from a stats point of view, Daicos has struggled so far against the Swans. He also then has Hawthorn leading into that bye before the Anzac Day clash. And we all know that probably the best tagger in the league now is Finn McGuinness. Be very shocked that Finn McGuinness doesn't go to Daicos. And we've talked about this at length, that the fact that just because you tag doesn't mean you're going to have a bad game, but there's enough evidence to say Finn McGuinness is a very good tagger. I'm kind of a little bit cautious on that. The hope is, I don't think like Daicos comes out and absolutely goes to a new level where somehow he's 700 and something K by the time we want to bring him in. The probably the worst case, he's probably still at his same price, which is 650. But the hope is, and this is probably a little bit what we were talking about early on with the side trading. And I know a lot of people don't like the idea of side trading premiums, but because we do have the 40 trades this year, it does give us some flexibility to play this strategy and looking at sort of which player can I side swap to get to Daicos. And it's trying to get on a player who hopefully is going to go off early, and then move that player to them, and hopefully Daicos does drop. It might only be 10 or 20k. Perfect world would be sort of 40, 50k in that period, and then hopefully the other player sort of makes 20, 30, 40k, and all of a sudden, you're picking, it becomes a 550 player into a 650 player, but it's actually only costing you one trade and no cash. And hopefully it's similar points in that frame. If not, hopefully your 550 player is actually getting more points than what maybe Daicos could potentially get through that. So I think it's an interesting strategy, and I've got no issue with people who want to start Daicos because the guy's a superstar. And if he comes out in round 0 and absolutely smashes the Giants, like, he's going 130, 140, well, that strategy completely changes. And then, of course, I'm going to have Daicos. If it looks like, it's only a 100 game or even less, I think you'll see a lot of other people jump off and that percentage will drop. So, it's all food for thought there. But you definitely want him for round 6, which is the Anzac Day clash, because after that, I think you'll be massively left behind if you don't have Daicos by then. So it's either start with him, no problems, but then you've got to have a plan for him. So I'm actually with James Sicily at the moment. So the training reports around that. So Hawthorn have had Sicily with Weddle and Scrimshaw taking the kick-ins with their practice. Hit-outs and their match sims. Sicily has been very much loving his own work down there, and we know what the guy can do. Like, he's been an absolute freak for a long time. Coming back from that injury, and he is the key player down there. Takes intercept marks. Even if he has to play lockout down, he's still good enough to get off that opposition player and impact the game. Loves taking a kick in. The big probably change we were seeing in that little bit of match sim that the Hawks were doing was, if he wasn't taking the kick in, he was definitely always the go-to player. He was making sure he was that guy 30 or 40 out that they kick to, frees up, and then he's the one distributing out of half back. So that's always important. And I probably actually prefer that more than kick-ins, because then they're actually getting the mark on top of that. So we saw like the game last year where he was against the Saints and the Tigers, where he had 170s against the Pies of 166. So that there's, even as good as Daicos is, I don't think there's any defender who has the ceiling that what Sicily has at the moment. So, and I think Daicos will definitely at some point we'll be talking that 200 game or 180 games where he'll be the next Gary Jr. But for now, I think Sicily's got the best ceiling of those defenders, and very rarely puts in a bad game. I'm really happy, and hopefully the Hawks' improvement means he's probably on the starting off more scoring chains. So that's what I really like about him. We're on James Sicily. The next one is, now it's not the full premium, and I've got and on my watch list here, I do have Tom Stewart. I do have Ryan Sinclair, Houston, who I don't mind as well because of Port Adelaide's early draw. But I am scrolling a little bit further down here, and I am on Hayden Young. I've even started to look at Jaden Short too. They have a very good fixture, a lot of MCG games early. St Kilda do give up a lot of points to defenders, who the Tigers do play early too. So he's a watch because of the role that he could potentially get under Uze. We know Dimmer wanted to throw him in the midfield. I really hope Uze settles him down back, but that until we sort of see that. But it's a kind of similar price point anyway. And I don't want to sort of change up my team too much. It's pretty easy for me to find that extra, 50k to get up to short with a few other movements I can do throughout my team and maneuver that, if I can spit that out. But Hayden Young is in there at the moment, very popular pick at the moment. And if we actually get up his percentage, 38% of teams. So he is the one that a lot of people are jumping on, and that's due to his midfield role, as we've all talked about. The finish to that season where he had the 123, 118, 113 and 111. I got to watch one of those games in the flesh and looked fantastic against the Hawks. So he's playing as that defensive midfielder. So the Freo will set up with either Darcy or Jackson as the ruck. Sarong's just your lock-in as your midfielder, and then they're going to have Brayshaw, Fife, and Hayden Young through there, and that's their main midfielder. So Hayden Young is your defensive midfielder. So in those games late in the season, he's had 10, 8, 7, and 7 tackles. Tackling machine in that midfield. And we've talked about guys like Rory Laird, for example, who you just pencil down sort of 7 to 10 tackles each game. Libba's always been like that. So guys who can already get, between 20 and 40 points pretty well once they walk on the ground. And then it's hopefully they find enough ball. So Hayden Young, what I saw in that Hawthorn game, if Freo kind of lost that ball, or they lost it up a little bit at field, he would zone back and go into that more free defensive play that he would normally do and try to take an intercept mark or get on the chain on the out. So they kind of have other players that then sort of run through the midfield, and Hayden Young, unless he's sort of doing a real hard job following someone, which I don't think he's going to, unless somebody really needs to lock down, and they might even change around that with Freo, but a lot of teams early, we know, go with their own structure. But Hayden Young does drop back, give Fremantle's defence a bit of a help there, but obviously if they're on the attack, then he can be one kick behind the ball. It's a great read of the play, takes some great intercept marks, but it's more in that centre bounce. So he's around that for the stoppage, but then he drops back after that. So he does have multiple ways to score, and that's why in those games in the season he was still taking 3-4 marks, which a lot of midfielders don't do. You see them get a lot of possessions, but their mark count is quite low, so he's still got the ability to take sort of 3 or 4 marks. One of them becomes an intercept, and all of a sudden we're talking 20 points for marks before we even get disposals on top of those sort of 20 to 40 points in tackle numbers. You're looking at a guy who could score 50-60 points there before we've even talked about kicks and handballs. And with those scores that he's put up, if that's even comes close to that, if he was a pure midfielder at that price at $5.25, you'd be like, maybe not so much. But he's those sort of numbers, could potentially put him in the top 3, if not top 1 defender this year, if it wasn't for the fact that Daicos is there, who I still think is going to be number 1. But I would say if I was doing my rankings now, it's probably going to be Daicos, Sicily, Young as my top 3 defenders. So want him in at that price, and I should correct myself. I said 50 grand up to short. It's like 25. So if that was to change, but I've got Young locked in there. But my third person, who is 50 grand cheaper than short, and this is a bit of the controversial one at the moment, it is Brayshaw. So instead of paying up for that extra really good defender, which could still happen, as I said, I like Sinclair, but Houston with their fixture, they have, I think it's 6, maybe 7 of their first 9 at the Adelaide Oval. And I can't see really him doing much different to what he did last season. So I do really like him, and potentially he could be the one that comes in if Brayshaw doesn't have the right role. But I do, and as I had before, Brayshaw's still in there. He's only 2% owned, and that's probably because obviously he's average, but we're not picking him for the long term. I'm looking at him as the short term. He's the one if, and this is only if, Clayton Oliver does not get up for round 1, which is looking more likely than not at the moment, just because he's not obviously with the team training, and it's always hard to come in. Now Clayton Oliver's a superstar. He might have to just rock up round 1 with no preseason. But if Brayshaw is the player, and if Melbourne need somebody who's that contested guy, because Petrarca's more your silk. So if it becomes Viney and Brayshaw, who's got to be sort of those tough nuts in the middle, and there's a period there where we know, let's just say Melbourne come out and say Oliver's not going to play the first 6 weeks or 8 weeks or something like that. You pretty well know then it's going to be Brayshaw and Viney in that midfield. And Brayshaw being a defender at 500k, well, you're always going to pick a person playing centre bounce midfield if he's locked in there at 500k. It just makes sense. Like the worst they're going to do probably in that stage is probably, might be 97, 98 if they were really struggling, but you'd expect 3 figures for sure. So if Clayton Oliver looks right, or if Melbourne actually come out and say, no, we're actually going with this other player, then it's simple. Brayshaw's not there. And then I'm looking at one of those options that I've named earlier. But for now, nothing's changed for me. There's no extra news about Melbourne and their and when Clary returns. So Brayshaw is very much locked in there. So nothing's changed there. And I think most of my midfield, my backline from last time we talked, hasn't changed too much. Because there's no real different news to come out. Probably the couple of the ones I don't mind, and we did get questions about it, was to do with, I had this question about Witherden. West Coast played a probables versus possible sides, and he was in the probable, so I just crossed him off the list. Don't mind Himmelberg. The question about Liam Baker. I'd want to see what his role is. If he's the Mr. Fix-It man, like he did under Dimmer, then I'm not going near him. So, but if he was, and the fact he's a defender forward, I'd probably start him forward anyway if he was locked into that Richmond midfield. So he's not at the moment. We've got no real news about the Tigers and how they're setting up. So it's a bit of a must watch there. But yeah, I would have him on your list just to see what he does, but more from the forward. Ridley has come out and said he will divide his time between forward and not forward. He's what is he doing between lockdown and being that free man? So it'll just depend on the matchup. So I'm still a little bit worried about that. Buderick at Gold Coast is an interesting one because they're trying to trade. Dimmer's trying to turn him into a bit of a Jaden Short. So it'd be interesting if he does get those roles. He's a must-watch for that round 0 game and plus the preseason. But if Buderick at his price looks like he is playing as a halfback who's a distributor from there at here, he must be looked at. And same with, and we've got a few questions about Kyle Amon, which I'll get in a little bit more when we hit the midfield. But it's actually Whittle who's the one who's been taking the kick ends. Looked unreal in match sim. So he's one I'd probably be more leaning towards in that mid price again. We talked about Massimo, I think last time coming in. There was some talk about people don't think he'll get a game early. It's a tough one there because I haven't probably seen enough of him in regards to training and see exactly how he's going to fit there with his role. But yeah, Whittle at 373. And then the other one we're talking about is Buderick there for the Gold Coast Suns. Which I think he's more at that 301 mark. Yeah, he is, and he's only in 1% of teams. So those two could massively change with their percentage if we know those roles are locked in. And it looks like for Weddle, it probably will be. So, especially if you're a draft player too, keep an eye on those two because they could be really handy late pickups. And then as we scroll down sort of those prices, Chapman, which is a very popular player at the moment because he's at 250. So it's only an extra 50k to get up to Buderick. I'm not as sold on Chappie at the moment. He's in 16%. And the reason is he's battling with Nathan O'Driscoll for that defensive wing role. So they've had Jeremy Sharp come in and we're going to have him on the bench. I'll let you guys already know that one in the midfield, but he's definitely got the offensive midfield role on that wing. He looks really good, and I think the wide open spaces of Optus will suit him. But Chapman, they've got so many options through that half-back line and that wingman. There's nothing locked in, and it could be potentially where maybe one of them, Driscoll versus Chapman, is that sub, or they kind of rotate off the bench. So there's nothing locked in there from a Freo point of view. So I'm a little skeptical about going there at the moment. So I think you'd need a lot more information to, absolutely pick him. Then Zach Williams, which is just, he's getting through the preseason fine at the moment, 216k. No surprise why he's in 61% of the team. So nothing needs to change there. A couple other ones we had was Kitty Coleman. Again, we get a look at him at round 0. If he is the guy that's coming out of half back and doing what he did in the grand final, again he has to be strongly considered. Liam Duggan I had a question about. I'm not as sold just because of the price. If you're spending 500k on a Liam Duggan, why wouldn't you just go up? Like, as I said, it's only 50k to sort of get up to that short region. So I wouldn't go there. Sheasel I've dropped off big time because he has been playing a little bit more midfield and half forward. So he's lost that half-back role with Fisher coming in. They've also got Luke McDonald. They're looking at a couple other options down there. So I think it's just that progression of Sheasel, as great as he was off half-back, but we do see this. It's no different like Daicos coming in. Now he's transitioning to the midfield. Sheasel's obviously going to transition as well. Harley Reid, where the opposite, first year, they're looking at playing him in half-back, and they will transition him up the ground. So that's a no there. Apparently Elliot Yeo and the ultimate bone man there, currently in 2% of size at 447k. It's just too much to pay, but he has absolutely dominated the match sim so far, playing in the guts. So that's if you've got I think if I had 60 trades, I might go there. But at 40 still, I just couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to that heartbreak. If he was 200k cheaper, I still don't know if I'd probably go there either. But if he keeps dominating, he probably will suck a few people in, and just hopefully for his sake, his body holds up. And the last question we've had with that is Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira. And he is one we have to watch carefully in preseason. It's 475. It's not the best price, 5% of teams, but 85 average last year. The natural development could see him go to 95, potentially to 100. Do I see him really pushing to that top 8? And he probably has to at that price, but he's definitely got the skills and the talent to do so. He's one that I would enjoy owning if I was in like a keeper league, which I actually do, which makes me very happy because just watching his development over the next couple of years is going to be amazing. If you're a Saints supporter, you'd be wrapped having him. So I've got probably no problems with the Wanganeen-Malira one, and he is one that could potentially jump up that 15-20 points, but I just think there's potentially safer options in there. And then we've got the rookie, and it looks like there's plenty of rookies in this defence at the moment. So if I was probably sort this by ownership, a lot of these rookies are going to come up. So for me, Caulfield's still in there. Looks like he probably will have a role for the Dogs. Halfback, they are trying to move quite a few players around. The sort of their match training notes so far. They did have Harms come in and play some midfield. And a little bit out on the wing now that they're trying to work out what to do with Bailey Smith. McRae played some centre bounce while Bont was in the with his injury and recovering from that part of the that. But at the same time, McRae was spending a bit of time at half back and also half forward. Caleb Daniel spent a bit of time again through that midfield, same with Ed Richards. So they are trying to get some of those guys who have been playing halfback for the Dogs through that midfield to give them other options, which gives the opportunity for a Caulfield to come in and play some halfback. So 123k, it's kind of hard to leave him out. Toby Pink, the former Swan coming off VFL. The North just don't have any good backmen at the moment. They need all hands on deck down there, so there's potential that Pink will get some early games. That's definitely what we're hoping. Gibcus 46%, he could be definitely very highly owned if he has a massive round one. He's got the ability to intercept. It looks like Bolter will play forward with Young and Grimes as your two key defenders, and then Gibcus as your third, who'll do like the intercepting role. It makes it hard to ignore him because he is cheaper than what his initial price of. Curtin there is 56%, did cop an injury recently, so I'd be monitoring that. Obviously we still got some time before the AFL season, but it's only 5 weeks. They got 48 days, so what does that translate? It's just under 7 weeks now. So he probably gets the extra week, 8 weeks, but it's always an issue when a young player has an injury in preseason. They're not going to probably rush him back, so just kind of watch that because that is a bit of a worry, and I'll probably be interested to see if people do start dropping off him if he's not there in any of those practice matches, but hopefully for his sake he is. And the other one I've got in there at the moment still is Marty Hoare, and he is the former defender of Melbourne who's now rejoined them after some really strong VFL form. He used to play that role with May and Lever down there, so he does have a good understanding, but we sort of don't know how Melbourne's going to line up. Ben Brown just went down again, and we probably know he's starting to get a little bit past it, but it just hurts that Melbourne structure again. Probably does mean sort of a Petty who's gone forward, gone back. If he was fit, where does sort of he line up? It probably means he has to line up forward. Sort of only really got Bailey Fritsch. They don't have a huge amount of options down there in that forward line. Who are probably you're back in. It's probably their Achilles heel last year, and it probably might be a little bit again. So do they try to move on to the defenders forward, and does Marty Hoare get an opportunity there? So it's a bit of a wait and see situation. All right, so we've got then the highest owned players. Oh, actually, we'll go the highest price because that's the easiest way. So in my midfield, I've still got the Bont there, even though he is a part of that recovery from injury. squad there at the Doggies, but it's easy for me to go down if Petrarca looks absolutely awesome and Oliver's not there, and that obviously will save close to 60k if I did that. And if Bont is fit come round one, he's probably the best captain ownership. That was probably a couple of questions from people early in regards to Bont, and it's like wouldn't you just want to lock him in as a captain option of going, for sure, like he's pretty safe, though there are a couple other better captain options in the early rounds, which I'll talk about in a moment. The second person I've actually got in, I had this question, do you have any Bombers players? And that's also something for the bench and the defenders. A few people are looking at Zach Reid. We'll see if he kind of gets early games, but I do have Zach Merritt in there at the moment. Now, having Merritt in, and it probably could have been Merritt or Laird at the moment, it could have gone either way. But it does allow me to drop to any of these guys on this list. In particular, who I'm looking at is Dawson, LDUs, Goulden, Neil, even Rosie in that sort of price range. And it's just because you try to go the more expensive ones because it does make it easier for your structure. Again, I've been trying to focus more on what my structure is, and then those players that can sort of alternate between those positions. But Merritt has been an absolute superstar for the last 4 seasons. He's the only issue is he does have moments throughout the season where he does drop down to sort of 550, 560, and you can pick him up. Even last season, it got to round 9, he dropped to 564, and that's in a year where he went 116. But he seemed to really thrive having the captaincy. But like 2012, he went 112. 2021, he went again 115. So here's a guy who's Essendon's best player, and for the last, even before that, I think 2020 he went 115. So for 4 years, he's got 112 and above. So if you kind of want to lock in a guy who's just a safe option, it's really hard to go against somebody like Zach Merritt. The only issue there, his round 1 match is probably going to help Finn McGuinness. So if that looks like it's might be the case, I might look at dropping down, or if one of these other players really puts their hand up and makes me want to pick them more than him, it's obviously I can bank some cash and go one of those other options. But for a guy who, and I've seen a few people put, starting to put Zach Merritt in their team, 8% at the moment. He's sort of in that range with your Dawson and Laird types. Some people are thinking there might be a few too many options through that Adelaide midfield, where that Essendon midfield, we know where he's locked in. So safe as houses, and is their leader. My third midfielder, and realistically, I'd have no problems having this guy at M1 this season, and that's Zach Butters in 31%. I actually think he should be way more owned than what he is. Terrific year last year. He is potentially the perfect VC captain sort of choice in those early games. So round 1 plays West Coast. We know they're going to probably league points. Richmond do league points to midfielders. He's got a high score against them of 158. He had that massive 184 against Melbourne last year. Plays them third in Adelaide. Essendon in Adelaide. Freo in Adelaide. Then does play the Pies at the G. Then St Kilda in Adelaide. Adelaide in Adelaide. And then they go Geelong, and then Hawthorn and North Melbourne. So leading into their bye, it's fantastic. And then they've got the round 13 bye, so Carlton's in round 12, which again is at the Adelaide Oval. 5, 6, 7, 8 games before their bye at Adelaide Oval. So it's really hard not to start Butters, and he is that perfect sort of VC or captain option because we know he's got the ceiling. That's where I don't mind the idea that Merritt probably drops down to Rosie, because there is some talk. It's like, which one is going to be the better one this season? And we've seen, I think Butters is more that accumulator, where Rosie can do those really flashy things. But it's so hard for a guy that overall scored 26-18 last year, 6th highest ranked player. You sort of can't go wrong with him. But the best thing I love about this is, so round 1, you've got Butters playing, and he is playing late in the round against West Coast. So he's your captain option if your VC was to fell. And for me, I'm kind of looking at VCs against North Melbourne. Their second game, they play Port Adelaide play Richmond, which is late at the G, and I don't think we're going to put up too much against, say, a Butters or Rosie. So again, he's a good captain option there. And then round 3, they also again play after North Melbourne's game. They do play the Ds, but that's at home. And what happens if it's a Melbourne team who is missing a couple of players? We saw he dominate last year. Round 4 again, he plays after North Melbourne, this time on the Friday. I think they've got the doubleheader Friday night game, so you could potentially even go captain as early as your 3rd game, or you could wait. But he looks a pretty safe option again. And probably the best thing about this is Butters in most cases is playing, before the West Coast option, and we'll talk about why that's important in a moment. Freo at home in round 5 early on, so you could VC him. So each week, he's either late in the round, which is a great captain option, or he plays early enough where you can put the VC on him. I really like him for that reason. Next one is the Fremantle superstar in Sarong, surprisingly 8%. And Chris and I were talking about this, and I think this is just the Fremantle non-Victorian factor. I think Freo probably get lost in the non-Victorian chatter compared to some of the other clubs out there. I guess the Giants and the Gold Coast kind of get a bit more talk because it's run by the AFL, and the players have come from there and left and headed there. They probably do more in the mines just because of the trading with them, and because Adelaide and West Coast, obviously their stature in the game, Fremantle probably just gets lost a little bit. But Caleb Sarong is an absolute superstar. This guy is going to be their number 1 midfielder again this season. And it's really hard to think why would you want to not start him, especially when some people are still on Brayshaw at like 11%. And I can see Brayshaw, as good as he is, potentially sometimes getting pushed out maybe to that wing, just to allow Young and Fife to also have opportunities. Maybe Matt Johnson, who looked really good again in that match sim that Freo played the other day. So Sarong was starting to show that he's also got the ceiling. He started the year after that poor 70, 101, 146, 100, 146, 130. Later on, he had another 135, a 138. 140 to end the season. So here's a guy who's not only consistently scoring hundreds, but actually putting up some really good solid hundreds, where you could be probably nearly getting to the point where he's safe to captain. So Caleb Sarong's in there. Next one, 23%. A lot of people on the Tom Green train, even though he's got the round 0 bye. He's one for me that part of this list of players that I've kind of got listed as midfielders. I could very easily make him another GWS player, and I really want to start with one, and I've talked about that in the previous podcast. Do I want to make him a Kelly or maybe even a Canelio, and then look at a side swap? But I think with West Coast and North early on, one of these GWS players is going huge. It's just a question of who. Tom Green's more the one if I pick. I'm kind of happy to ride him nearly through the buys, but I don't really want to trade Green, where I'd be more willing to trade a Kelly or Canelio. So he could be one I just get there and have that one premium from that round 0. It just depends on how he goes. If he was to go really well against the Pies, it's going to be hard to ignore for everybody, because they're going to think, okay, premiership side, and he still scores really well. And it just seems to be about his time, his year to really go next level. Like 111 last season, contested beast. This guy racks up possessions for fun. So yeah, get him in there. And then I've still got, and this got under a little bit of criticism on my last podcast, which rightly so, but for some people thinking, why have I got Matt Crouch in there? I think Matthew asked about this, but yeah, I'm saying to Chris about this. I'm like, we're still pretty big on him. Like the way he finished off last season, Adelaide do have quite a few options through there, but at 490, outside of maybe going up the 40k for Jack Steele, or drop, and I don't really want to drop all the way down to Guthrie, because I just don't think that's an option. But this guy has in the past played some really good minutes in the midfield. He finished off so strong, once he came back in round 19, 86, 144, 112, 122, 86 and 98. So yeah, he's got the ability to average at least 100, maybe more. I'd be hoping at least, maybe if I was to start with him, he probably hopefully could, have a couple big games in that average in the first sort of leading up to the bye period and maybe jump himself between 550 and 600. Do I see him as a keeper all year? No. And that's probably the argument with people. It's like, well, if he's not going to be a keeper all year, why pick him? And that's a fair response. And that's potential to why I might look at getting the cash and just moving him straight up to a Canelio or a Kelly. But he looks like he's going to be still starting in that midfield for Adelaide. And if it's him, Dawson Laird, he's going to get no attention. Like, if you're tagging or trying to put any pressure on anyone, it's going to be Dawson or Laird in that side. So, if Matt Crouch is the one they're going with, he can just go to work, do his thing, grab his 30 touches each game, and he's just going to rack up the ball. And I kind of like the idea that he's a bit of a pod. There's a name there who's currently in 4% of teams, and we did have quite a few questions about Kyle Amon, and it's definitely worth touching on. So I get what he did at the end of the last season. Was it the last 6 games? I think he averaged 107, was taking kickouts as the mover out of halfback. And there's this talk that he could still have some of that role. But there's talk about him kind of being winger and then halfback and sort of alternating between the two. It definitely is, at the moment, Weddle is the guy that they want on kick-ins. Now, some will say, well, it works so well with Amon, why would you change that? Well, clearly Sam Mitchell really likes what Weddle's doing there, and they can still see a role for Amon. So if Amon is the one that they do decide to go with, and he is the one that's taking majority kickouts and is the main rebound from halfback guy, then yes, he needs to be considered even at 480 odd, because he's going to pick up defensive status. And, as a defender who could potentially average over 100, that's an absolute bargain. But I'm not completely sold on the fact that he might get defensive status at the moment, just the talk of Hawthorn setting up their backline. So that is a problem in itself, because he needs to play then 4 out of the 6 games full-time defense to get, because obviously he's going to need, he's going to be he's going to need 35%. So what's that? He's going to play at least 2 full time there, which he could do. But at the same time, if he's going to spend time on that wing, we know what sort of scores he put up last year on the wing when he was there. He's not terrible, but as a guy, unless he actually grabs that defender's status, it doesn't become the greatest thing. I think it's the dual position kicks in after round 6. It was around earlier last year too. So that is a little bit of a worry, because if he didn't, for whatever reason, pick it up in the first 6 rounds, it's not going to be till the bye period, and then you're kind of stuck. He's the sort of guy which I don't think is going to kill me in price. If he was to start getting that role early on and I need to do a correction trade, I'd be more than happy to correct to him and actually get more data on sort of how Hawthorn is setting up. So that's how I'm kind of feeling for that. Then actually kind of just starting, because if it doesn't work out and if he is more halfback wing with no kick-ins, you're kind of stuck there with this guy who's, he might get to 520, and what do you do with him there? Very similar to Matt Rowell in that price last year. I think Rowley was the same price. We all went with Rowley. Now, Rowley was a midfielder. Rowley did get to 595, but it was spiked by that massive 185. Up until then, he was kind of hovering around that 520 mark. And that's the thing. Unless Amon was able to get a massive spike, how's his price going to lift enough if he is playing more time in the wing? So it is on the watch list. It's not really high priority for me at the moment, but I do have the obvious swap, Matt Crouch and Amon, if Hawthorn were to come out in the next few practice sims and Amon was the man there. So I don't like the price either. I think there's potential better options, as we've talked about in the defending part, with Buderick as the obvious one, and who was the other one? And I'm sure you guys are already answering this. And Weddle, if they look like they've got those roles. And even in the forward line, there's a lot of talk about Zach Fisher as well, playing in that halfback role. So they're all much cheaper, who could have similar roles. So I'd rather probably go one of them at the moment, as it's sort of panning out, than what Amon is. But in saying that, that doesn't mean you completely wipe him off the list. just continue to watch, because you definitely need somebody that hopefully, for those people who are looking to lock him in, continues on what he did last year. Two of the guys in particular I haven't mentioned in there is LDU and Goulden. Goulden, I do like. I think he could really ramp it up as Sydney's number one midfielder this year. It's just a little bit of that round zero buy again. And if I'm probably going to take one, I'm going to go Tom Green over Goulden. So that's why I don't have him in. LDU, fantastic. Didn't see him in the match sim the other day. Don't know if he was a late out. That's got my own concerns about that, which is frustrating, because we know he was good for a few late outs last year. The guy is an absolute superstar. I can see him absolutely ripping the competition to shreds if his body is right. So somebody who I have looked at having in my side, wouldn't mind in my side, and that's an easy one again with that whole merit down to somebody. LDU is somebody very much on my watch list, but it does scare me a little bit with just the way his body goes. So I kind of want to see consistency over the next 4 weeks. If LDU gets through the preseason with no hiccups, he's because we know what he's going to do. So that's not it. It's just get through, take your bumps and bruises, and not pull out or not play half games and stuff like that. And I definitely can see not just myself but a lot of other people boosting up that 18%. But if there is, we get that niggle, we get that knock, and there's some worries about that, then I would rather just go, yep, no problems. Other people can own him. He's probably going to come out and go 140, but then there will be that week where he doesn't play, and then people will be like, oh, here we go again. So I just think that, it's going to do our heads in. So it's just something to watch as we go on. McKercher dominated their match sim, so just lock him in, 202k, no problems with that. And another one, Riley Sanders, playing midfield in the match sim and looked absolutely fantastic. So easy players there. Again, we talked about Jeremy Sharp earlier with that offensive wing for Fremantle, 51%, and that's absolutely no surprise. I've still got Jordan Clark in there, but it's kind of a watch. It's just because he's such a high pick, and I can see why 46% are on there. Probably the biggest change here is young Clay Hall, 9%, played in the West Coast match sim, and the probables versus possible. So I'll quickly just touch on this for a moment. And we had, they had what they called the yellow team. So this was Clay Hall, Reed, Cripps, Long, Duggan, Darling, Allen, Flynn, Williams, Jones, Brockman, Ho, Hunt, Barras, Yo, Cole, Petrarca, McGovern, among a few other names. So as we expect that they're probably free, West Coast, like a lot of front liners, and then you've got they had the blue team, so they had Chesser, Cully, Jinby, good to see Cully back, Gaff was playing in there, but then Marriage, Livingston, Witherden, Gilby, Barnett, Johnston, and 5 top-up players. Another guy by Rusco. So firstly, how far has Andrew Gaff fallen? I was sort of saying a timeline from that moment that he hit Brayshaw in regards to his career. It's probably hasn't been the greatest period for him. Hopefully, for his sake, he can turn it around. But looking at that yellow or the probables team from West Coast, it looks like a lot of their starting 22 in there. And funny that this Clay Hall was playing midfield for them. So somebody obviously that they liked his waffle form last year. At 117k definitely needs to be considered. Moving on, the rucks are pretty straightforward. This has not changed, and I don't think there's too many rucks to really look at. For me, it's still who am I going? The cheaper options. Now, the only thing I don't like about it is they both have an early buy, but I do have a way around that in a moment. 68% and 53% for Grundy and Gawn. There's no, I haven't been put off at all about that. Timmy English, I can see why it's only 9%. He was by far the best ruck last year, but there is a couple questions just about sort of fitness at the moment. And though he's been cleared, it's back to full training. I think there's still that odd question mark. There's some talk about how they rotate their key tools. knowing after all this, English will probably come out and average 125 anyway, and anybody who owns him, it's going to be a bad time. But I think just because we've got other options cheaper, Gawn and Grundy can get somewhat close to that. We know Gawn's probably good enough to actually get 120 plus as a sole ruck. So, I'm confident with that at the cheaper price. The other one a few people are looking at is Marshall, which is no surprise because he has such a good year last year at 114. And if those English or Marshall work better for your buy structure, absolutely put them in. Got no issues with that at all. But I prefer the two cheaper ones. I did have Finbar Marley, and Cherry actually just copped an injury to the face. Will miss the next month of preseason. Should be right to go by first round. But sort of who's North Melbourne's next in line. And I can see why a few are now thinking, well, Marley might be an opportunity here. Also, they'll probably look at him as the loophole. If you want your loophole player, jump on Cohen Livingston. And this is what I was talking before about Butters and Rosie, and if you're looking at them as VC or options. So second last game in round 1 is West Coast. The last game in round 2, West Coast. The round 3 is the third last game, so game number 7. Round 4, they're actually a little bit earlier on the Saturday, but they do play after North Melbourne's match and also Port Adelaide's match, which is very handy. They play the last match in round 6. I think round 5, round 6, they've got Freo in the Derby, which is before North Melbourne this time, but it is still the Saturday night game. Round 7, they play the second last game. Round 8, they do play on the Saturday night again before North Melbourne, who are playing St Kilda. Round 9, we've got the second last game. Round 10, the last game. And then round 11, the last game before we start hitting that bye period. So Cohen Livingston is just the lock there as the forward ruck, 102k, but he's the obvious loophole because if he is not playing, which is probably most likely, he will be able to be that VC captain option for you each week if your VC goes off. So yeah, he's the one that should really be the one at what do we say? Finbar is 29%. It should really be the opposite way around in Livingston, unless you think Finbar Marley is going to play. Get on him. Forwards. Now, I had a couple of people say I'm probably not going to start the forward line I had last time. It's probably only changed one. I've actually fitted the premium in. I've tried to get the one premium in, but I have seen quite a few structures out there where people have the no premium. So I really like that idea. I know like Causa asked about Flanders. Maddie asked about Fisher. So these are all, there's so many mid prices we're kind of looking at in this range for the forward line that we kind of can't sort of discount any. So for my forwards at the moment, the one premium I have jumped on and brought in, and it's actually not McRae. I've gone with Luke Jackson. Two reasons for that. McRae worries me a little bit about what his role is going to be. Bevo up to his old tricks, trying to train McRae as a mix to fix it match. McRae's going to go through the midfield at some point and go like 120 in a period. But what's he going to do the rest of the time? Is he going to play half forward? Is he going to have to fill a role at half back, play some wing? It's got me worried a little bit. Where Luke Jackson, Sean Darcy's still not 100%. Until I sort of see Sean Darcy lining up in that midfield in the ruck, I'm pretty confident with Jackson because we know what Jackson's going to do as a sole ruck. I think he averaged 118, but he's still with Darcy in the side playing second ruck, averaged 85, which is still, if you look at the forwards we had from that are forward eligible this year, you go down to Finlayson at 14th, so it's still not that far off that top 6 mark. Like top 6 was Caleb Daniel at 92. It's a 7-point difference, and we know Jackson at some point is going to play ruck. The other good thing is Jackson loopholes with Livingston the weeks that Grundy and Gawn obviously miss, so you still have 2 rucks in there, and then one of your rookies from the forward line can come on, and it is still best 18 anyway, so I really like Jackson's cover. And then that's the only primo I got. Am watching closely to sort of see what Shai Bolton and Dusty do early on, and especially that round 0. Caleb Daniel again with that potential midfield time has to be looked at. I'll mention Dylan Moore just because it annoys Ben. And the last one is Flanders that we get a lot of questions about. My only worry about Flanders at the moment, he's in 38% of teams, which is absolutely massive. People thinking that's that discount forward that we're going to get, who could be the number one this year. And all depends on how Dimmer uses him. We don't have enough knowledge really about anything about Gold Coast training at the moment to see what each role is going to be. So if it is going to be Touk, sort of Anderson, Rao, Flanders, you've got to consider. And they obviously were trying to get him through, but yeah, it's a different coach this year. So I want to see it before I kind of make any, big changes. And again, it comes to structure. So I'm looking at one of these guys. If it isn't Jackson, it's pretty easy for me to drop Jackson down to Flanders. If it has to be, he's starting that midfield and looks like he's going to dominate. So yeah, a bit surprised he's that high so early, but it looks like everybody's trying to get one or two of these premium forwards in. Another one I kind of got criticised with, but he is back training, he's been back running, is Tommy Lynch. One just to watch in round 0. He is at 15% owned. And I think Al Patton was the one that put it out there. Yeah, he could be the one that's going to frustrate people because he's going to go huge round 0 and then everyone's going to want him, and then he's going to go spud it up in round 1, or it's going to be the opposite, spuds it up in round 0, nobody gets on, and then he dominates round 1. So he's Richmond's only real main forward. Bolt is going to be that second forward, but it's all on Tommy Lynch. He's got the ability. We know he's gone on runs before. He's got the ceiling, and that's at 287. Like, he's a guy, if he kicks 6, takes 10 marks and a few contested ones, he could easily go 120, 130, 140 in that price. It's going to be huge. But if he has some poor games or he's struggling, but the fact that he is back running, so it's hard to kind of ignore at the moment. There is somebody else in that forward line that I am also considering. We'll talk about it in 2 secs. Harms is another very popular pick should be a bit more actually. Actually, no, this is a surprise because I thought he was more popular than what he was, but I was mixing up with someone else because we were talking about this, and Harms was only on 9%. I actually thought he was more owned than this. So with Bailey Smith out, and the way Bulldogs are mixing up his midfield, he's definitely going to get some time around that Bulldogs effort. And if it's not midfield, it's going to be half forward line. So they've brought him over for a reason. He hasn't actually left my side so far until I see something completely different. Billings is in 23%. It'd be interesting to see if he gets a good run at it with his body. If he does, he should fit really well in that Melbourne half forward line and trying to push up the ground. Harley Reid's just a no-brainer, 74%. If you are playing Supercoach, first thing you do is put this kid in. He's going to dominate. He's going to play off half-back. He's going to look awesome. So put him in. Sean Manor, Geelong, they just love picking these sort of players, don't they? Every year it's the exact same thing. So get him in. Cadman, he's bulked up. He looks really good. He does have West Coast and North Melbourne early on, 17%. As much as it is a key forward, it's hard to ignore at 127. Former number 1 pick. So even if he can snag sort of 2 or 3 goal games and take some marks early on, I definitely think he's a good option. And I've still got in the North Melbourne, the former Richmond BO new wing, who's only in 1%. So I still think he gets an opportunity down the back line, and potentially be interesting to see what they do now that Cherry's out injured, and if Cherry was to miss early games, is Coleman Jones fit enough to put in the ruck? Sort of how do they do that mixture? So I'm kind of interested to see that. The other guys I've got on my forward list, so we've had some about, somebody asked about Hayes, Himmelberg, which I don't kind of mind. I think they're just on the watch list to see how they go in fitness. The big one is Nate Fyfe. He has looked awesome pre-season, and it's really hard to ignore him. We know he's the injury concerns, but at 283k, which is around the same price as Lynch, and that's the obvious one that I can very easily go Lynch down to 5. But if he continues this up and has an interrupted preseason, as he is at the moment, touch wood, that 22% is going to be much higher, because how can you leave Fyfe out? And the hope is the ownership gets so high that you're not going to get burnt by owning him anyway. Fisher, the hard thing was he did have that injury concern the other day, cleared of major injury, which is good. So I kind of just want to see some continuity. The role was fine. Playing off halfback looked really good in that first half. So I've got no issues if you've got Zach Fisher in there at the moment, 378, 10%. I like him more than Amon because it is 100k cheaper and he is a forward in Supercoach with that sort of role that, he's going to see plenty of ball. We saw what Cheezel did last year. So it's hard to ignore him. So I really do like that one. But it's just got to watch the injury. Connor McDonald got some time through the midfield the other day, only in 1%. It's just a bit of a worry. It's an awkward price for somebody who you'd want to know for sure that he's playing in the guts. But he has, so far looked, done everything right through preseason, and that's always what we're sort of looking at. So just want to monitor to sort of see how Hawthorn will line up there. But yeah, I kind of don't mind that either. And then you got the kind of the Bombers guys, Sardis and Caddy, which we're obviously getting a few questions about. And Caddy's looked pretty good preseason so far, but I feel like Essendon's got so many sort of options. I kind of want to see which way they go settle down. The big one, a couple of questions I haven't completely answered, but Marty, F2, F3, I think that's going to be big for people. I don't mind it if you like the kind of two premiums and sort of Flanders is your F2, but I kind of prefer one of those premiums or even the none if you want to get a premium into another area. But it looks like, McKercher and Sanders are going to be locked, so I think a lot of people already got that sort of 6 midfielders in there already. So maybe if you want the one extra defender, but there's some good defenders throwing around. So I'd probably say F2, F3 is probably going to be, if you're not going to go the two sort of bigger guns. I kind of like that price, your Lynch, your Fife, Harms. Not as much Jordan. I kind of want to see a little bit more from Sydney, but I've kind of dropped off there. But yeah, those guys in that sort of 200-ish range, or maybe it is just Fisher at F2 if he's fit and firing, and then it could even be Fife at F3. Finlay McRae's there at 33%. I have had him in and out. Looks like he's been doing some really good things pre-season too. So as that guy is an F6, potentially look at moving that cash around, and that's what I'm saying. Sort of keep that structure where, say, merited M2. I can very easily drop down. It doesn't really burn my team too much because, there's some other players in that 610, 620, like LDU, where I can easily get 30k to upgrade one of my bench options, like a big new one straight up to a Finlay McRae if I want to fit that in. So without sort of burning up my team. Tony G's asked about the 40 trades. I'm going to do a separate discussion about all the new rules, so look out for that because I think that deserves its own kind of podcast. Kieran's like, what do you think about the lack of forward mid deep PPs this year? I absolutely love it because last year, we had all these great options, but everybody picks them. So there's no point of differences right now. Like we're looking at teams, and as we said, like some people have got McRae, Jackson, Dusty, Bolton, Flanders. Like we even look at those percentages. And then even you get down to those mid prices, Nick Watson's in 27%, Sean Darcy's an option, actually apparently look really good in there, Matt Sims, people jumping on Taylor Adams. There's so many options even the forward line, until we sort of get more data and see how they're playing, we're kind of not going to know. So I really love the idea that there's all these options. Same with the midfield. Like there's so many potential premiums there. We're actually going to get some different teams and different strategies around the 40 trade because of the 40 trade. So I think that's great. Break evens, how to win Supercoach. Well, hopefully, I can go a bit better, but I'll try at some point to see if we can get Emily or JP on because they have obviously done it. The guru's right there. Adam and I think it's my Stitch talking about trading premiums isn't a great plan, and we're kind of on this because we kind of had the news about they were going to add more trades this year, so that's kind of why we're looking at it as a potential option. You don't want to get too carried away, but I think there is definitely room for 2 or 3 premiums. Like I did it last year. I think it was the year before when at Collingwood, when Grundy traded him early to get to Darcy Cameron, and that gave us a huge ranking lift. I have done it in the past with great success. You've just got to jump off the premiums at the right time. It's the big play that we use in sort of fantasy Premier League because the team's getting a run of fixtures and you sort of jump on that team. So you don't want to be doing it for everybody. You obviously want to lock in a lot of your premiums, but I do think there's room to juggle a couple of them to get the right fixture. It's all about trying to maximise your points. To Matthew, who said Sonsi, what about him? Mate, I would have Sonsi locked in my team at the moment if the fact he wasn't suspended early. But once he comes back in, we'll get a couple of games to look at him before his price rise. Hopefully, they give him a couple of games in the VFL, bring him in, and that'd be the perfect result for us, because I think, he's definitely got a role this year for Richmond. Did have a question about Dylan Moore. Ask Ben about that one. He potentially could go top 10. Like, Hawthorn do have some good options up that forward line now, outside of just, your Lewis and Gunston for your tools. But, they've obviously brought in Ginnivan and Nick Watson. So maybe Dylan Moore does get pushed up a little bit more up the ground. So that could be definitely a really good thing for us. And now finishing off with these sort of training notes. So Hawthorn we've talked about with what they're sort of doing with their kick-ins. Sanders for the Doggies looked awesome. They've got a training camp coming up, the Bulldogs, this week in Queensland, so be interesting to see if any news comes out of there. Carlton, unfortunately, Silvani has gone down with his ACL, so condolences there for him. Hopefully he can get back, and because he was playing an important role. So kind of what sort of Carlton player could potentially take his spot and what they do there. A couple of people mentioned to me about Fantasia today. I think he's 175. I don't know about his body, but hey, if he was to get through preseason, it might not be the worst pick, but we'll have to see what the Blues do there. So they've got a training session coming up on the 28th. North Melbourne. We talked about McKercher, looked awesome through that midfield. Even Dersma, fantastic. You can see why he's in 43%. I'm not as much on Dersma because he is going to play that mid-half forward role. Unlike Sheasel last year, who does play similar, they put Sheasel at half-back. I don't see Dersma getting that opportunity. I still think he's got the ability to impact. Like, he hit a couple of goals in the match sim the other day. So, he's definitely got some great skills, but 193K, I'd rather go someone cheaper. And a lot of people on Darcy Wilson, and that's probably the better way to go because it is 60K cheaper on that one. But they're out at Bundoora tomorrow, which is now today on Australia Day. So be interested to see what comes of that. Collingwood are doing open training on the 6th of Feb, and then they go up to Sydney for 4 days. So you got Melbourne, they're out at Gosh's Paddock on the 31st, and they're going and also got 2 training sessions at Casey, including Australia Day. So we'll get a little bit more information about that. Essendon's got a training camp coming up first week of Feb in Shepparton. Sydney are going to Coffs Harbour for 3 days, and Freo has a training session Australia Day, and Richmond's got one on the 31st. So some of these clubs are really opening up to their fans for open training. So as some more of this information kind of comes through, obviously we'll get it out, and not just us, but a couple other people out there on Twitter. We'll get it out to you guys, and it's something that it helps us kind of settle our teams down that little bit more, potentially add more rookies to our list, or cross off, like, as I said, those 80 names that I've got going at the moment. So that's where I'm at the moment. So it will be kind of interesting to see how this develops. And as we said the other night on our group pod, that round 0, it's just going to be so important. But even leading in, it's all well and good for that one game of data, but you really want to kind of watch and see how these players, go throughout these next 3 or 4 weeks. Because, if the ones that are consistent in a role, it does give us enough, confidence to pick them, in particular some of those guys who are those mid-prices. So, I hope you enjoyed this in-depth chat, a little bit longer than what I was going to originally go, but they're kind of starting to nail down a structure which I'm really happy with, and it's just about which player in particular is going to fit some of this structure. But it'd be interesting to see sort of where you guys are going with that, and what you guys are thinking in regards to your round 0 and round 1 breakdown there. At the moment, I've only got the 2 technically primos who are playing in round 0, but there are a couple obviously cheaper players that will be missing, and we're having buys throughout that round 2 through to 6 period that we've got to be mindful of when it's best 18. All right, guys, thank you for tuning in, and we will talk soon. Bye.